Ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our third Mezcal Monday, where we are covering all things agave. Week 1, we did 101 tequila. Week 2, we did 101 Mezcal. There he is. Week 3, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into Mezcal specifically. We're going to talk about labels, types, and sorts of Mezcal and what it takes to get there. Again, 2 of our 4 co-hosts are here, and that is Lou Bank of Sacred Agave and Michael Rubel, who is the owner and manager of Estereo in Logan Square. Our guest today is Carlos Mendez Blas, who is a master mezcalero and the person best able to keep all of us in line and actually address what is required to actually be mezcal. And to talk a little bit about what he does for a number of the different brands that he produces for.
I just want to point out, though, Brett, you're saying that the guy who's supposed to keep us in line is the one who's on the saddle.
Yeah, well, we don't have, unfortunately, Pat and Monique. Pat should be coming on soon. Monique is not going to make it today, and that would be 2 of our co-hosts, Pat Brophy of the Whiskey Hotline and Monique Houston of Winebow Imports, who is an importer and wholesaler of mezcals and also a friend and an expert. So, Carlos, you're muted. We're going to start asking you questions. And okay, Carlos, welcome.
Sorry, I'm here. Thank
Carlos,
you.
welcome. And the first question is, we unfortunately left our horses both mechanical and live at home. So tell us about where you are right now.
Actually, today I'm visiting a friend in Ocotlan de Morelos, Oaxaca. It's a town about 30 minutes away from Oaxaca. I'm from Matatlan, which is like an hour away from Oaxaca in a different direction. Ocotlan is going south. Matatlan is going east of Oaxaca. And today I had the honor to visit a friend who just built this very new palenque and who just started a brand. And here I am with some other friends, mezcalero friends. And actually I know you have some labels to show, but I also have some labels to show too. So maybe the labels you show, there are some labels that are already in US, and here I have some labels that are not in the US.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay, perfect. So just again, we caught folks up in a number of looking at our list, and a number of folks have been with us for all 3 of the weeks. For those of you that haven't been here for the 3 weeks, we are going to be covering just what it takes to be mezcal at this point in time. So, Lou, do you have it handy? One of the things we talked about last week was the definition. Lou, do you have that definition handy in front of you?
When you say Michael, that definition, you're talking about for what it is to be mezcal, right?
What generally is it to be mezcal?
Okay, so mezcal is distilled fermented agave that has been literally certified as mezcal, which means it has to have been made within the denomination of origin, the area where you're allowed to make it, which is 9 states within Mexico.
Okay.
And then there are all of these subsets, and that's the whole point to what we're doing today. We're going to go through a whole bunch of labels, certified mezcal labels, and understand what those different subsets or subcategories of mezcal are. We're going to make Carlos explain the labels to us.
Okay, so now there are a couple of different things that are going to be identified, and probably the 2 most common are what could be perceived by a lot of people to be a grade of mezcal, something that says artesanal, ancestral, so on and so forth. The other key piece of information that is going to be, there are a number of key pieces of information, but the other piece that's almost always going to appear is generally the name of the agave or the combination of agaves that's being used, either a single agave name or ensemble, with hopefully a listing of what is actually ensembled together. So first, let's talk about the difference between, and maybe Carlos or Lou or Michael, whoever wants to address it. Let's start basics. What is the difference if somebody reads on the label ancestral versus artisanal versus nothing of the sort?
Well, the way that boy, and this is as open to interpretation as the Bible, but the way that I read it is it's sort of a cascading effect, right? If it just says mezcal, then it means it's just mezcal, and it's not claiming to have been made in any specific way. It's just saying this is certified as mezcal, and it could literally be made in the most ancestral ways, but they're not they're not actually saying that. They're just
Okay.
saying mezcal. So it could also be made in the most industrial ways.
Okay. So then if a label says artisanal, what
So,
should that mean?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lou, but
Not an interruption
actually,
at all. You're the man.
yeah, but actually, when it says mezcal, and there is a reason why, and it's because these big companies that have involved into mezcal industry, they have a very big power in politics. So we didn't get the chance to actually put industrial mezcal on the label. So the only way we could manage it is just to put mezcal, but it's actually industrial mezcal.
Well, but to be fair, Carlos, like I think when from your heritage and how you see spirits made, right? Like you have a very different definition of industrial than those of us up here in the USA. And I point this out because, without question, if you look at something like Zignum, like that is absolutely industrially made. But then if you
Yes.
look at something like Benaba, like it may be industrial to you, but you compare how they make Benaba to how they make any whiskey, and I would say it's actually fairly compatible.
Well,
Well, here, but I think what Carlos is saying is that there is a restriction. In other words, I think, Carlos, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're trying to say is that for some reason, there are mezcals that are made in the artisanal manner that aren't allowed to put artisanal on the label. Is that what you're kind of trying to get at?
uh, I'm sorry, but not really. Uh, Actually, as I see it, all of the labels that doesn't say mezcal artisanal or mezcal ancestral are industrial mezcals only. So the other labels that says mezcal and are artisanal or ancestral, but doesn't have the certification to put the word mezcal and doesn't have the hologram, and it can say mezcal, and then it says destilado de agave. So they like kind of and it's a mezcal, but it's not certified, and it's still a mezcal, and it doesn't mean that it's an industrial mezcal. It's a mezcal, but it doesn't have the certification.
So is there an industrial mezcal that you know of that is not Zignum?
Yes, there are some, and I don't want to talk about it because some of them can say artisanal and are not. But besides Signum, and because I've seen some videos and some pictures about other distilleries in some in Oaxaca and other states of Oaxaca mainly that are main industrial, but are sold as artisanal.
So let's talk about that difference because I think that's the pertinent question, right? Is the
Here, and
difference?
Lou, take a look, just so you know, as Lou's addressing this, Gabo from last week, Gabriel Velasquez Zazueta. Hopefully, I'm saying that right, Gabo. Gabo had just kind of weighed in, and he's kind of commenting. He says that the use of artisanal comes with the CRM certification. So,
Right.
Michael.
So the pertinent question then is what's the difference between artisanal and just mezcal?
The way that it's produced. Artisanal is cooked in an under earth in an oven, in a pit covered by rocks, a meal by a horse, or maybe with a machine, fermenting in open air tanks made by wood or concrete. It could be, distilling copper. It's very specific, and it says in the regulations it has to be distilled in copper, and it could be one distillation or two distillations. And the difference between artisanal and ancestral is the distillation process. Artisanal is distilled in copper, ancestral is distilled in clay pots. And comparing these two categories with mezcal, with industrial mezcal, they could use a diffuser. How you call this big machine where they cook the agave?
Autoclave.
The autoclave mill with these big machines and get the juice and ferment the juice in a huge tanks and add the yeast and distilled with this very huge distiller.
So much like tequila, basically.
Yes.
Carlos, another question. So you distinguish between artisanal and ancestral. You mentioned like all the processes leading up to distillation before artisanal. Are those same processes do have to be followed before ancestral? And then question number two, where does a Filipino still count in there? Because like in Michoacan, a number of mezcal producers are using a Filipino or a wood still. Would that fall under ancestral or artisanal or neither one of them?
I think it could fit into the artisanal process, but actually in Oaxaca, no one uses the Filipino style. So it's the Egyptian style,
right?
And it's actually the distillation technique, and we use the copper steel and the Montera, Turbante, and the Serpentine.
Okay, did Michael or Lou, do you know offhand if that's different for like Michoacan and the other places where it's much more common to use Filipino still?
What to qualify as ancestral, it has to be a clay pot still.
Okay.
And it can be either a clay or a wood condenser, but the pot itself has to be clay.
Okay. So technically there you go. Then something like Don Mateo, which is Don Mateo is a Filipino still, right? So then Don Mateo would not qualify as ancestral or here Gabo just said 4.4.3 mezcal ancestral from the gnome. So that must be a number. So we'll I'll tell you what, everybody, just to keep this rolling along, we will address that. So unless somebody wants to read, here somebody who reads Spanish, can you look in the chat and translate that?
Well, what's the succinct question we're trying to get at here?
Well, the succinct question is just, and I think that we're getting at it very broadly, is the distinction between and Carlos actually said it very well, which the distinction is between an industrial produced mezcal and an ancestral or an artisanal produced mezcal is. Would you guys agree with that? I think Carlos actually said it really well. Right now we're kind of getting a little too deep into the minutia probably.
Well,
there's another piece though, in the ancestral definition that we're leaving out, and that's the milling of the cooked agave. To be ancestral, it has to be done by hand, whether with a mallet or a matzo with a large bat. So it's not just the still, it's also milling.
Actually, but that's not accurate. The milling can be done, in fact, using a stone or a concrete wheel.
Or a machine.
Yeah.
You know, many of the producers in Santa Catarina Minas, they use machines to do the milling.
They may do that, though according to the gnome, you can't use a machine. The machine is fine for artisanal, but not ancestral.
And 80% of the producers in Santa Catarina Minas, they have the concrete, they have the hole to smash the agaves with the mazo, but then they have the machine too, and they mainly use the machine.
Right, but I think that those expressions...
in copper steels, and they are ancestral mezcals.
I think that it's funny. I actually stopped by Benny's to take some pictures of labels in order to do this comparison, and I was surprised at how many of the Real Mineros were listed just as artisanal, not ancestral. And I think that's the distinction when they have used the hand tools. And I've never seen a Tahona at their Palenque, but
they use a wood chipper.
right. So, and when they use the wood chipper, it's artisanal. But when they use the wooden mallets by hand, I think that's when it's ancestral.
No, that is the difference, and Edgar started doing that more. And certain batches are going to be artisanal and certain ancestral, and that's the difference.
Yeah, and Gabo, and I think Gabo just weighed in and said that it is artisanal, not it is artisanal and not ancestral. If you use a Tahona or some of the other things up into a mill, an actual full-on mill like you'd use in the tequila business,
right?
Those would fall under artisanal. And the still also the same way. The still in Oaxaca, you would have to be artisanal, not ancestral, if you're using a copper still. Direct fire, which Gabo also just weighed in and said that it has to be direct fire. And then Luis, just to get this question, a Filipino still is it's essentially a hollowed out tree trunk. It would be there's some argument that the Filipino still it appeared in Mesoamerica at the same time that there was history of distillation being done in clay in Northern Africa. So there's an argument that the Filipino still came in at the same time. So in other words, that they were distilling in Mesoamerica at the same time they were distilling, that the Moors were distilling in Northern Africa. So just trying to age and date it, but the traditional still, and it's used a lot in Michoacan, it's used a lot in Jalisco for raicilla, is basically a hollowed out tree trunk that then holds a copper pot on the top that you fit over the top of a copper pot with a fire, and that contains all the vapor. So again, overriding what we've done is we have distinguished. So let's get on to the agave. So what we've distinguished that industrial, that essentially with these rules that we've discussed, essentially the difference between artisanal, ancestral, and industrial are the difference between how much active handwork is being done by distillers versus how much active work is being done by machines. And so what we're trying to narrow in on is ancestral / artisanal, or artisanal / ancestral. That's what we're really narrowing in on, and that's what we really are talking to Carlos about, because these are the very, very traditional styles that have been done, again, since potentially Mesoamerican times for hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 years in Mexico with agave. So the next piece that is going to appear as a critical part of the label is going to be the different agaves or magueys. So Lou or Michael, you guys can probably address that at least.
All you, Miguel. Do you have a favorite agave, Michael?
It's like, what am I addressing exactly?
Have you been checking your email? Dude, we're live.
No, I'm with you. Yes, the next thing we'll see the magueys on the label. We will. Do I have a favorite maguey? Tobalá, maybe Bicuiche? I don't know. Okay. What about you?
You know, it's funny. I used
Carlos? Does Carlos have a favorite maguey?
He does.
Espadín, actually.
Yeah?
Yes, Espadín, my favorite one.
That surprised me. I didn't expect that answer. Why do you love the Espadín, Carlos?
Because I can drink Espadín anytime I want, anywhere I want, and as much as I want. Comparing it with some other expressions like Tobalá or Tepestate, or including ancestral, that I think it's going to be a waste of mezcal if you just drink it because you want to relax. So I think that if you are drinking a Tepestate or Tobalá or ancestral, that you have to really give it a time to really get what this mezcal is trying to express. You know, comparing it to Espadín, that if you're stressed, you can just drink an espadín and relax.
So
That's
let's
why. That's why.
Working for me right now. I'm drinking it.
so
Well,
let's
and here, Carlos, that's interesting. Now, so there are hundreds of agave that potentially that could be used that would be legal to use. We know that in reality, there are probably 20 or maybe less, or 30 or maybe less that are actually very, very widely used. There are many that could, but it's more important to distinguish also producer, because the fact that you like espadín is your favorite because it's accessible doesn't mean that they're all the same. I mean, Carlos, you produce,
Yes.
you work with a number of different palenques, right?
Yes.
And so, and all of whom use the same material that makes significantly different product.
Yes. Yes. I agree with you. But after all, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely different. So if you compare an espadín from Matatlan or from Miahuatlan or from Jutla, they're totally different, but not as different as if you try a cereal from Matatlan and a tobasiche from Jutla. It's like a different world. So I could, in my personal opinion, I can drink any espadín, and I really enjoy and I really like the ones from the Jutla. But it doesn't mean that it's as complex as a tobasiche or a madrecuiche.
So can we talk about what, I mean, without trying to get too deep into the botany of it all, like what's the difference between an espadín and a tepextate?
Well, first I would like to explain, because we are talking about labels. There are two words that you'll see on the labels. You can see agave or you can see maguey, and that's regulated by the norm in Mexico. So if you use the word agave on a label, you have to use the scientific name of that agave. If you see in a label that it says 100% agave, and it's gonna say maybe Angustifolia ho, which is the espadín. If you see the word maguey, it could say 100% maguey, and it will say espadín. But also you have the option to have in your label both of the description. As in, I have here one of Palomo, and actually this one is it was meant to use in maybe in the next steps, but it says maguey.
There you go.
Please.
You have to get off your horse, man.
Yep,
Maguey,
there you go. No,
Yep.
maguey espadín. Maguey espadín, because I use the typical name of the agave, which is espadín. So I had to use the typical name of the agave, which is maguey. So that's why it says 100% maguey espadín.
okay,
That's
that's
one,
good. That's actually good. That's actually very good to point out, and thank you for pointing that out, because I think that then that might make it a little bit simpler, because to let people know that Angustifolia and espadín are basically the same thing and not two different things.
Yes, but if you go to Karwinski, you can say 100% agave, Karwinski. But if it says 100% maguey, and it could say cuiche, madrecuiche, tobasiche, barril, sanmartineño,
So
bicuiche.
basically what you're saying, Carlos, is that of the 200 to 300 agave varietals, all of which can be used to make certified mezcal, that you've got all these varietal names and you've got species within agave, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
there are different kinds
That's
of
correct.
Karwinski, and that's your Largo, and that's your Bequiche. Yeah.
Yes, that's why most of the labels, it could say 100% agave, Angustifolia, and then it says maguey, espadín, or maguey madrecuiche, or tobasiche, or cuiche, or any like subtype that you're bottling.
And what's the good agave? What's the good maguey? It's espadín?
Uh,
What?
What's the good one? That's what people want to know. What's the good grape for wine?
Here, I think the Carlos is weighed in on that. Carlos, just ignore Lou right now. You've already answered that, Michael. So you sell more variety directly to consumer on a regular basis in the bar world than anybody else. So how do you help walk people at Asterio through the labels? If somebody that comes in and has heard that Asterio is a great place and I just want to have a drink, how do you walk them through the labels?
So yeah, I made the decision a couple of years ago to organize our menu by the scientific name, because not only for guests, but I had ongoing education with the staff, and I wanted them to really get a sense of the families, because the vocabulary can be a little bit daunting at times. There are so many different strange sounding words that maybe you don't know, that I linked up the whole menu by scientific names. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, you're good.
I know. Go on. So, like, I mean, Karwinski is like one of the most complicated, because you know, under Karwinski, we probably have 8-9 different things: Madre Quiche, Biquiche, Cereal, Tobasiche, Verde. But all of those plants share certain common characteristics. And so when you're explaining to the guests, you say, oh, you know, well, Karwinskis as a family all grow up on a stalk, and the plants all look a little like this. And it helps people make sense of it. And that's worked out, I think, really well. Though I am moving the menu now to sort of get rid of that, sort of the difference between the distinction that Carlos was making. There are so many different regional variations, where in one village you call it this, another village you call it that. And the longer I spend like studying maguey, the more interested I am in that. So the next menu that I'm working on now is going to be only by region. And I will only use the name that the mezcalero calls it, and I will leave scientific names out. And we'll have to bring a lot of bottles to people and have them look at it. But at the end of the day, I think that's a lot of fun, and that gets into sort of regional definitions. But for a couple of years, we did the plant first, so my staff could get a feel for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yes, Lou?
Yeah, sure. So, like, to me, the frustrating part of the agave names, particularly when you start using familiar names, is that you'll get one name used for, like, Quiche is a good example, right? Quiche is going to mean a Rotacanta if you're in Santa Catarina Minas, but then if you head down to Miahuatlan, that exact same Quiche, that same name, means a Karwinski, two completely different agaves.
Absolutely, and that is just the fun of it. And I think that
I think what it says is that where you're going, Michael, I think is the right direction to go. What you're talking about now is, let's just narrow it down to what the mezcalero is calling the mezcal, right? I mean, that's kind of what you said.
No, absolutely. And the names that people call it, I think is at the end most interesting. Scientific classification is good. And if you're going to learn about mezcal, you have to have like a basic literacy in the scientific name of a plant. And then like Rotacanta, which is usually called Mexicano, but Lou is right. In Santa Catarina Minas, that plant is called Quiche, which in the rest of Oaxaca is a completely different plant. It can be confusing, but at the end of the day, the mezcaleros are the ones with the experience. This is the culture, and I think that that's the direction that I sort of want to see it go.
And I would like to also explain, and you know, there are many mezcaleros that don't really go out of town, that they just focus in producing mezcal and call it as they want to call it. But they don't know how they call it in other towns. And like Tobalá, we call it Tobalá in the Valley, and they can call it Papalomé in Ixteca, in Chato, in Yautepec. But also Papalomé in Zapoteco, in Matatlan, it's called Doblea. And there are other towns like near to Soquitlan that they don't speak Zapotec, but they have heard about people in Matatlan or people speaking Zapotec calling the agave doblia. So and now they call it dobila, and that's like kind of like a new agave, but it's actually a tobala. But they don't speak Zapotec, so they heard we call it doblia, and now they call it dobila. So that depends on like where the mezcalero goes and how the mezcalero like gets involved into getting to know how they call the agave in other places.
That's good. So in last week we put up some reference sites and some places where people could go very easily and get good information. Michael or Lou, if you guys off the top of your head have a place where that is pretty easy and clean to read, that lays out a little bit more closely what Carlos just said, you know, if at the end we could recommend that, there should be a couple of resources where you would be able to look at that. We've got a couple of other questions. Gabo's weighed in on a couple of other things that we're going. Yeah, I said there are many also. There are also many Maguey unclassified. Agreed. That's probably like a 501. That's when we write a doctoral thesis.
That's where I just throw my hands up and I just
Right.
go and drink it, and if I like it, I like it, and if I don't, I don't.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So Carlos, maybe one of the things. So now we've talked about a few of the things on the label. So maybe to sort of give that a little bit of life and texture. Carlos, you work with a number of different Palenques or a few different brands. So talk about the different ways that the different producers go about their business to produce the different styles, all with one agave espadín, you know, based on some of the people that you're working with.
Okay, so there are different ways to make a difference in the product. And the most important to me is the batch, because every single batch is gonna be a little bit different from batch to batch. And it depends, in my personal opinion, it's gonna depend on where this agave is coming from, maybe the wood I used to cook the agave, how many days it was in the oven, how many days it was in the fermenting tanks, how I distill it, and how I do the ABV adjustment. So every brand is gonna be different. First by the batch and then by the ABV. There is a difference in the flavor if you have a brand at 40 or at 45 or at 50 ABV. And also there are more difference. It could be an espadín, just a joven espadín, or it could be a pechuga, or it could be a mezcal distilled wheat or avocado wheat, which is an explanation that I'm gonna give you later when we get to this point.
I don't think you should wait. We should dive in on that now.
Oh,
I think that's a
okay,
really
okay.
interesting point.
Okay, yes, and I just saw in this comments. Also, there is a difference when you use pabilos agaves, which is when it just reach maturity, and it's pabilo, so the mesontle is closed, and maybe next February or March the kyoto is gonna pump out, and that's a pabilo to us, and that's a good agave to use to make mezcal. But also there is capon. Capon is when you let the agave reach full maturity, and the capon grows up, and you castrate the plant. So as the capon is growing, maybe like 30, 40 centimeters, you cut the quiote, and you leave this agave or this maguey in the field for at least 6 months, and then you can use it to produce mezcal. And that's actually, and I know because I've tasted it, and there is a difference in the flavor when you use a capon agave and a pabilo agave.
And why is there a
And
difference? What is the difference?
first is because you let your agave more time in the field,
So more
and
time
it
is more sugar?
more when I think that the agave uses its sugar to for the quiote to grow up, so it kind of uses its strength. So if when we cut the quiote, we have to leave it rest and recover its sugars. And when it recovers sugars, it recovers like kind of more sugars than it used to have before the quiote comes out. And that's one of the reasons. And then, well, it spend more time in the field, being a capon. Making an agave capon means we are castrating the agave, as we do with animals, like with horses or with bulls. We do the castration so they are more strength, uh, and I've seen it with dogs that they are more calm too. But there is a reason of uh, of castrating the agave, which means give us more mezcal with I don't know, I would say a better flavor, because I really like more a mezcal from Capon than just uh, Pabilo mezcal.
Yeah, so it sounds like it is the concentration of sugar, that it is one
Yes,
way where it's like you have sugar at a certain level and then the sugar kind of stops and maybe drops as the capone is coming in, and then you castrate and then go, and then it rises and stays steady.
yes, that's right.
But I feel like
That's a better explanation.
I feel like we ran away from Pechuga as well. I don't
Okay,
want to
sorry,
miss
yeah.
that, and I don't want to miss talking about Oven.
Well, also, yes, I think we missed that step. You'll have the category of the mezcal, which is mezcal or ancestral or artisanal that we left already, and then we go to the class of mezcal, and here we have joven, which is as you get it from distillation, and you can get the ABV down with water or with tails and heads, or as you want to do it. That's a joven. It doesn't suffer modification in the flavor as you get it from the agave. And then we have reposado. The reposado has to be at least 2 months in the barrels. I, I I don't do reposados or añejos, but I know that it has to be 2 months in the barrels, and then añejo that it has to be at least 1 year in barrels, and then we go, and this is like a very big difference uh, with tequila and mezcal, that from añejo we go to madurado. Madurado, which is a new category that is mezcal joven, that we put it in glass and then leave it to rest for 1 year. It could be in a cava, or just bury it into soil and leave it there for 1 year, and it's gonna be the category of madurado. And then we have the destilado con, which means you have your mezcal from first distillation or two distillations, and then you add something else and do another distillation, and a different ingredient. Like here, I have this coffee, and it says destilado con café, and it's a third distillation mezcal. And after second distillation, I add the roasted coffee beans to the mezcal. I do a maceration for a couple of weeks, and then I do a third distillation. And that's why this mezcal is clear. Before I do the third distillation, it's like really, really dark, black. And then we have the avocado con, which means that after your distillation, it could be one or two distillation or three distillation, you add an extra ingredient. And it could be, there we go, with the worm. And
Which I
actually
always
that
drink when I'm here at a stereo.
Oh, that nowhere found video. People
and it could be like Lou just showed us with the agave worm, or with an I've seen some with a piece of cooked agave, or just I've seen some with some fruits like with pears or with apples. Whatever you want to add it after distillation, and don't do another distillation. That's an avocado.
Okay,
Any,
so that
yeah.
so that's good. So just a couple of questions in there, and probably the one that's the most interesting, because you talk about aging in glass, right? Buried either in the ground or in a cave, the Madurado. How does that make a difference? What's the difference in profile between before it goes into the glass and when it comes out after a year? Because most people don't think about aging in glass, even though a number of products do. Probably most notably, Alsatian eau de vie is almost always aged in there for a number of years in glass. So, Carlos, what happens in the time that it's in glass?
So that's a really hard topic to me, as talking as other mezcals from other states or even from other regions in Oaxaca, because I don't do Madurado mezcal. I don't have a cave where I put the mezcal to age in glass, but I've tried some Madurado mezcal, and actually it was from, I think, from Durango, and I really like it. And I remember that mezcal I tried, it was at 55 ABV, and it was really soft. I didn't feel that it was that ABV. So I think that the time, and without any daylight, the mezcals kind of get totally diluted with the water, because after all, if we have a 45% mezcal, it means that the rest is water. So as the time passes, I think that the alcohol and the water gets really like perfectly mixed, that you don't get the perception of the alcohol. You just get like the flavor of the agave. That's my personal perception, but I don't have like a really, maybe a scientific explanation,
Okay.
because I don't do Madurado.
Well, yeah, I would guess, and Michael, maybe you, because you've had I think scientifically, the guess would be what's happening is they're leaving headspace, and there is some oxidation that happens, which means some harsher, harder elements are allowed to dissipate out, and that could also explain why the alcohol is there, but you're not getting the sharp character of the alcohol. Michael, would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. You're looking at some oxidation. You're looking at chemical composition changing. You're looking at the congeners sort of shape shifting, if you will. And in garrafones, and just like in clay or in glass, resting mezcal makes a huge difference in the flavor profiles. And if you've had a bottle for 6-7 months, you can also notice the same thing on a very small scale happening in your own collection.
Okay.
Drastically from when you first open the bottle to finishing it, for sure.
So a lot of the definitions we went are a little bit esoteric, and you don't really see a lot of them, except for one we kind of want to hone in on, which Lou had mentioned before, which is Pechuga, because Pechuga is something that is pretty commonly seen. So Carlos, why don't you talk to us about Pechuga? What is Pechuga?
Well, first, I want to clarify that I'm gonna talk about my mezcal de Pechuga, and my mezcal de Pechuga, or the one I produce, is a mezcal distilled 3 times. So after second distillation, I'll do a maceration with fruits and some. My recipe is like very complex. I have 27 ingredients in my recipe.
Like a mole.
Like a mole, actually, yes. Because I also have some chilies, bananas, pineapple, a lot of stuff, and I do a maceration. And then I do a,
Carlos, I'm sorry. When you're talking about maceration, can you talk about how long you're leaving the fruits in there?
usually 2 weeks. No, not that long, just 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And the reason why I leave it 2 weeks is because I also keep trying the mezcal where I put the ingredients, and when I taste that it tastes as the ingredients I put in, well, I think it's ready to distill. So I do the maturation with the ingredients, and then I do a third distillation. And when I do the third distillation, I put a turkey breast inside the Montera, which is the tool that goes on top of the still. So the steam of the mezcal just goes through the turkey breast.
And it's raw turkey breast, yeah?
It's raw turkey breast, but it's never gonna taste. At least in my personal opinion, I've never tasted a mezcal de Pechuga taste like turkey or like chicken. It tastes like the ingredients I put in the mezcal for the macerations. And I remember that one of my friends, a mezcalero friend, told me that the reason that they put the Pechuga is because, I don't know, the one of the ingredients, or maybe some of the ingredients that they put into the still for distillation, for true distillation, are oily. So when they did this distillation with more ingredients, they got these oils at some point get uh, evaporated and then condensed, and they got these oils in the final product, and you could see your bottle of mezcal with some oil in it.
Right.
So in order to fix this situation that they had in the mezcal, in this mezcal distilled with some different ingredients, they decided to put a turkey breast, so the oils will stick in the turkey breast, and it doesn't go, it's not gonna go down to the serpentine and condense to the mezcal. That's one of the reasons I've heard, but it became a tradition, and Oaxaca it's a state full of tradition, so we're keeping the traditions and we're still using the turkey breast.
Yeah,
Carlos,
Evelyn Wade, who works for Maracayma Tequila, but also Zicala. Evelyn weighed in and said the Pechuga acts exactly like that. The Pechuga or the chicken acts as a filter, essentially, for some of the ones. So there are a few different ways, and Carlos described his ways. I mean, essentially, Pechuga very broadly is it usually involves some sort of poultry, chicken, or turkey, because there are also people who do it like conejo. I know there was a producer who did conejo where they used a rabbit for the same purpose. Borrega.
Yes,
So it's essentially some sort of animal with spices contained within it, basically, as a way to introduce the spices. Michael?
Well, I think the biggest misconception about Pechuga, which people I think always have, which I think we should endeavor to correct today, is that Pechuga is all about the fruits, right? For most families, it's all about the seasonal fruits. The guajolote or the pollo is there to absorb oil, or it's there to do whatever, but it's, as Carlos says, I mean, people tell me all the time that they taste the chicken and they taste the guajolote, the turkey, but of course they don't. It's really all about the fruits.
But actually, also I've seen in Oaxaca before, before this mezcal boom, or before maybe mezcal gets popular in the U.S. In Minas, they call Pechuga to a mezcal, to a joven mezcal, where they add the agave heart. They add like a little piece of agave heart,
Of roasted agave.
A roasted agave heart,
or cooked,
and it looks like a reposado or añejo because it gets with the color of the agave, and they call it Pechuga. So then in Mataplan, they started to add a piece of cooked agave inside the bottle, and we call it minero. because we see that in Catarina Minas they add the roasted agave in the bottle, and they call it Pechuga. So they start to do the same thing in Matatlan, but they call it Minero because it comes from Minas.
But there's no, my understanding is there's no legal definition of Pechuga, right? It's not part of the NOM. There's nothing that's actually regulated with regard to the word Pechuga, or for that matter, with the word Minero.
Yes, yes. And in the regulations in the NOM, it goes into the category of destilado con. So we have in the label, and it says destilado con pechuga, which means that it has at least a piece of any meat. It could be turkey breast or chicken or rabbit or ham or whatever.
So we've got a question, Carlos, real quick. One question for Carlos: does the steam from distillation actually cook the Pechuga like sort of like smoking a meat?
No. Well, yes, it cooks the meat. It cooks the breast as we keep distillating. But actually, after I'll guess like 4 hours or 5 hours that we're burning the steel, the breast gets cooked, and then it starts to get dissolved because it's like really hot, because it's in my case it's a third distillation. So I'll add mezcal at 40% or 45 ABV. So as the first mezcal I get, as it drops from the still, it's like at 96, 98 ABV. So as the times keep passing during the distillation, the meat, the breast starts like falling apart. So when we finish and we open the still, we only have the bone of the breast.
Okay, interesting. Because we did have a couple of comments, and I think it goes back to Carlos, what you said, that there are different ways to approach this. And some of them, one of the comments by a listener was that they tried Pechuga once and they didn't like it because they thought it was what was the exact comment was, I didn't like the Pechuga. It tasted like cooking oil. And it sounds, interestingly enough, like that was more a function of how the spices were handled. Either that or it was a really bad bottle of how the spices were handled rather than how the meat itself was handled, since I think we've kind of determined a little bit that it actually acts as a filter. So
there's, I've also seen some folks who they don't hang the meat. The meat is dropped into the distilled liquid along with the fruits and such, which is going to be a whole different way to process it. But there's, that's what I find to be so beautiful about these agave spirits, is that there are a million different ways to do the same thing.
I mean, there's a mezcalero in Puebla, Marcelo Luna, who he doesn't put the fruits and the protein in the condenser. Actually, first off, he does a chicken mole. His wife does all the cooking. She cooks the chicken, and it's a completely finished mole, and they put it into the boiling chamber, not the condensing chamber.
Right.
So the flavor in the mole poblano Pechuga is not exactly subtle. It's super, super intense, and people wonder why it's so intense. Well, the style of
because
production,
it's becoming part of the distillate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. It's I don't know, chocolate mash, if you will.
Okay, well, so there are three. So there are three different ways that you can approach this. You can either take liquid and macerate everything in the liquid and then pull it out and distill that liquid after it's macerated. You can actually distill it, which is what Michael just said. And then the last would be, you're almost like, if you're hanging it in the chamber, then you're sort of distilling through it. So that will tell you some, that'll tell you some. It's too bad that doesn't have to be designated, because that's some indication of the complexity of a Pechuga, that you just aren't, that you're getting that extra character, but the amount of that character you can get is going to vary depending upon how the whole thing is processed.
Almost all Pechugas you will encounter will be the fruit and or nuts and protein in a condensing chamber. That's almost everything. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, but maceration, like you do it, is you don't see a ton of, and my guy Marcelo, he's the only one I know I've ever seen do that.
So yeah, Carlos, you don't know, it's not common for people to macerate, right?
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay, good. So we've got Pechuga, we've got agaves covered. Anything else that you think that we've missed? And then at the end, Lou, you're going to have to help me with this. I think we had a question from one of our Facebook viewers.
Yes.
That was asking last week's resources. If we can run through real quick again some of the resources. I know we talked about Tequila and Matchmaker. I know we talked about the Bowen book.
Oh yeah, Divided Spirits by Sarah Bowen. So when you're saying run through them, is this something that we should be posting?
Yeah, we should probably post it.
So yeah, I think Mezcal Reviews is a great place too.
And then Carlos, you had a bottle in your hand.
Yes. Well, the other thing you'll see in the labels that is very interesting and that you should know when you're trying a mezcal is the state where it's produced. And
yes,
here you'll see it says Oaxaca. I have another bottle here, and it says Durango. So for regulations, it has to say in the label with the state where the mezcal is produced, because you have 9 states in Mexico that can produce mezcal. So every label has to say the state where the mezcal is produced. And there is I get really confused in this part, because we can have mezcal produced in Oaxaca with agave from Puebla, and the label is gonna say Oaxaca. So after all, the thing that matters is where you make your mezcal. And it happens also in Oaxaca that I'm from Mataplan and I produce mezcal in Mataplan, and many of my agaves are from Mataplan. But I also get agaves from Miahuatlan, from Nejutla, from Yautepec, from Mixteca, from different regions. But still, everything says produced in Matatlan.
Okay.
and there's a great question that I want Michael to approach about. Okay, so for mezcal purists, suggest this is a blasphemous question, but do you have a delicious mezcal cocktail to recommend? Because most of my friends can't appreciate mezcal neat.
I mean, I feel like you're always asking me this question when we do things on video. I mean, but I mean, there's a lot of great cocktails. It's just sort of hard to do like recipes, talking live. Maybe that's something that we could post as well. There's nothing wrong with drinking mezcal in cocktails. I would hope that most people would graduate the wrong word. Would also learn to appreciate it neat, because cocktails with mezcal are beautiful, and that's how we sell. That's how we sell a lot of mezcal at Studio, and are able to help a lot of families in Mexico. But sipping it straight is the ideal way to experience it at the end of the day. But maybe we can, along with resources, I can post up some recipes. How about that?
Yeah, you know, and can I just throw one last thing in on that?
Throw 5 last things in on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of last things. It's interesting because I think the question was asked the way that Sumi asked the question just as Carlos was concluding. For mezcal purists, this is a blasphemous question, so Michael addressed that. Do you have a delicious mezcal cocktail? So Carlos, just out of curiosity, Carlos, do you have, if you're going to mix a mezcal with something, what is your favorite mezcal cocktail?
Mezcal Negroni. That's my favorite cocktail.
It's so fancy, Carlos. So fancy.
Well,
So we'll get some up, and hopefully everybody has seen. Lou has been, just for folks in the chat, Lou has been posting some of the things we discussed for that question that were asked, a couple of Google spreadsheets. Gabo actually added a Google spreadsheet in there, so hopefully everybody can see that.
And it looks like he added one that has cocktail recipes in it.
Okay.
So then Michael doesn't have to post anything and he can feel better about his day.
Except for the
love to post some recipes. Would love to. It's just hard to do. Like, you know, I can't give recipes verbally.
So Michael, how would you make if Carlos came in and said he would really fancy a Mezcal Negroni, how would you make it for him?
Really straightforward. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I would take Cruz de Fuego Espadín, which Carlos makes. I would do maybe a half ounce of that, but I think I would like throw a little bit of a curveball and maybe put in a quarter ounce of Cereal, which is a Karwinski, a more vegetal green mezcal that he also made. So 3/4 of a combination of Espadín Cereal or Espadín Magic. And then I personally don't care for sweet vermouth, classic Italian sweet vermouth with mezcal or sotol negronis. I think it's sort of overpowering. I think it gets in the way of the mezcal. So in agave negronis, I like to use a substitute. I will often use Coqui Americano or Coqui Rosa, two great products that come from the Moscato grape in Piemonte. So like a cousin of vermouth, but much lighter and much less sugar is present on the palate. And then Campari in equal parts, and I do a couple dashes of our homemade grapefruit bitters.
Okay, so that sounds like that's an awesome Negroni.
I'm dying to try it. Send me the recipe.
You've been to the studio a couple times, but next time you come, now
Yes.
I know Negronis. That's what I hit you with.
Okay, thank you.
So, and we have a note that when the tasting ends, because we've had a couple of questions, they're not showing up, and some people watching on Zoom. When the tasting ends, we're going to post the video on the Binny's blog, and our producer Jim will add the resources that Lou has been putting on, that Carlos has talked about, that Michael's talked about. We'll put those on the Binny's blog post for those folks looking for that. Question real quick for Michael as we're getting close to wrapping this up. Thanks for offering the small format mezcal at Stereo. Do you see more small format bottles on the market going forward?
Boy, I'd love to see more of it. I've been encouraging all the people I work with to make them. I have literally every small format bottle I could get my hands on, but I have good news. Venenosa, the Esteban Morales, and all the beautiful raicillas and like Destilado de Agaves from Jalisco. They have 200 ml bottles coming very, very soon.
Nice.
Yep. And we do, and just for folks too, we are bringing in a Binny's. You will see those as we are taking, at least authorizing all the bottles as we get offered small formats. We're authorizing those because, you know, people have developed such an interest in mezcal and raicilla, basically agave and a lot of things agave that aren't tequila. So as an offering, just to make it easier for folks to get a chance to try and sort of dip their toes in a little bit, we're taking those in as we get them, including Gabo, including the El Bujo 375.
And they fit, and the 200 mLs fit right in your back pocket, man. I mean,
yeah, well, we're careful about that. We would like you to consume them responsibly, as always.
You don't want to sit down while you got it in your pocket, but I'm just saying, portability is a beautiful thing.
So, well, I'll tell you what, I think that we have covered a lot of the ground that we wanted to cover today. We're a few things that are going to go on. When it posts on the blog, we're going to post some of our resources so folks can get that on the Binny's blog, where a live copy of this tasting will be. Next week on Monday, we're doing Mezcal, I guess 301 for lack of a better way to put it. Lou, can you kind of describe what we're going to cover then?
Yeah, so what we're going to talk about, we've been saying Mezcal, and sometimes we're actually talking about mezcal when we say mezcal, but sometimes we're talking about agave spirits, uncertified mezcal. And sometimes we're talking about raicilla, which is its own certification, but is kind of a mezcal, but isn't a mezcal. So we're going to get in, and this will be absolutely where there's a throwdown. We're going to be talking about different names for different kinds of agave spirits from different communities, and I'm guessing that we'll also jump into Sotol, which isn't made from agave but gets wrapped into this discussion because there are a number of producers of Sotol who use the same kind of pre-industrial methods for fermentation and distillation. So we'll go over that, and like once we get into that world, there are so many different opinions about it that there's so many butting heads about what this is and what this is not.
Okay, well, and Bacanora will be talked about it now. You know, and now they're just getting like agave spirit, which I think is, and I don't even know how TTB probably classifies that as DSS, not even under tequila or under any of the agave nomes, but they're traditionally produced from traditional agaves in non-traditional places that don't fall under. So that's something that
we're going to have to butt heads on that next week, because in fact, I would say that's not accurate.
Well, how do you know? We haven't even started arguing about it yet, Lou.
Well, because it's not traditional. In fact, like you can find incredibly industrially made agave spirits, and tequila is a kind of agave spirit, and mezcal is a kind of agave. So like this is where it gets all really confusing, where we're trying to sort it all out, I think, in next week's.
So this is so there's your teaser for next week, for next Monday at 5. Michael, what did you want to say?
No. We'll leave it. I was just going to say, and you're saying sort of non-traditional places. What we'll talk about next week is also that
non-traditional. Sorry, and I understand non-traditional to regulation. If they're making it there's some tradition that exists.
Some tradition. We'll be talking about communities that have been making mezcal for 400 years who are not allowed to call it mezcal.
Yes.
If that doesn't interest you.
That's perfect. Well, gentlemen, yes. I think that this is a good place to wrap, to lead into next week. I want to thank everyone very much. Carlos, thank you for writing in and helping us out here classify this. Glad to have you. Michael, thank you. Lou, thank you again. For all the folks watching, thank you very much for the great questions.
And, can I just thank you, Brett? You know, one of the things I keep forgetting about is that Michael and I in July were in Wisconsin. We were at a supper club outside of Baraboo, and we ordered an old fashioned, and there was no whiskey in it. And we called the whiskey hotline, and they solved our problems. So I want to thank you for solving the whiskey deficit in the old fashions in Wisconsin. Thanks for that.
Not a problem, guys. That's why the whiskey hotline is here.
Yeah.
So, but thank you very much. And as I said on the Binny's blog, where this will post again, Jim, we'll get some of those resources out there. And if you have any other questions or you want a detailed list, you can also email either Lou, which is just Lou Bank at Sacred Agave, or you can email the whiskey hotline team, which are just spirits@binnys.com. And we're happy to give you some things that you can hit, some links you can get that will get you information, both relatively simple and deeply esoteric and complex. So folks, thank you very much. And we will see everybody next Monday at 5 o'clock for Mezcal Monday, Mezcal 301. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers. Take care.